Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books Livestream. My name is Sean. I'll be your host. I'll introduce our guest for today in just a moment. Before I do, I have a couple of announcements. Next week, Dr. Peniel Joseph will be here. His book is called The Sword and the Shield, The Revolutionary Lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. That will be at noon on March 30th. I'm also prepared to announce that our new People's University for the summer, which actually starts in late May, will be entomology. That's right, bugs. Our new People's University return of Brood X, the cicada, which have been sleeping for 17 years under the earth or in the trees. And we will cover the entire gamut of the insect kingdom, starting with cicadas, beginning in late May. So tune in for that. Now, we are very honored to have our guest today. Her name is Jennifer Shahade. Am I pronouncing your name? I should have clarified that. Is that correct?
No, what better time than to do it live on air? I'm Shahade, actually. Shahade.
Jennifer Shahade, I'm so sorry, is a
No,
chess
it's fine. I'm joking.
poker player, both chess and poker, a commentator, and an author. She is a two-time United States women's chess champion and was the first woman to win the U.S. Junior Open. She's a Poker Stars ambassador and hosts two award-winning podcasts, The Poker Grid and Ladies Night. Her books include Chess Bitch, which you'll have a chance to win if you ask the question today, and Play Like a Girl. Jennifer is Women's Program Director at US Chess, where she works to bring more women, girls, and gender minorities into the game through programs like Girls Chess Clubs, Beginners Women's Classes, and the Madwoman's Book Club, which I'm sure she'll tell you about. It's a thinking woman's book club and provides a forum for adult women to socialize over a book related to chess or intellectual discovery. Like I said, she'll tell you more about it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jennifer Shahade. I said it wrong again. I'm sorry.
No, the first one was right. Perfect. Shahade, thank you so much. It's okay. You know, once you say something wrong one time, it takes like a lot of repetition to get it right. So I'm really happy to be here. I love books, and the opportunity to speak at this event hosted by the Ohio County Library that's right. I got that right. Yeah. It's really exciting for me because it got me a chance to kind of talk about books that have been influential both to my career and also to my career in promoting women in chess, and then also to my own chess development. But I wanted to start with one that really encapsulates so much about women empowerment in chess and women empowerment in general. This is a book that came out in the early 2000s, and it's by Marilyn Yalom, who's also the author of The History of the Wife and The History of the Breast. And unfortunately, she died a couple of years ago, about 1.5 years ago, actually. She was a historian and a writer, and she wrote an entire book about this moment in chess history, the birth of the chess queen. So the chessboard did not always have a queen piece. It didn't always have a feminine figure at all. And it started to when chess moved to Europe in emulation of European chess queens. But what a lot of people don't know is that the queen used to be the least powerful piece on the chessboard. That's right. The absolute least powerful, with the exception of the pawn, which when we talk about chess, usually we don't include the pawn when we're talking about pieces because there are 8 of them. So we call pawns pawns. We call all the other pieces pieces, right? So the queen, the weakest piece on the board, it can only move 1 square diagonally up until around 1500 when the rules started getting played around with, because you can imagine if you play chess that moving the chess queen only 1 square diagonally is a really slow game. So they sped it up with this idea of making the queen a lot more powerful. Now, what's really interesting about that is the experimentation with the rules, especially with the queen becoming more powerful, was also during the time of the advent of the printing press. So that allowed the new rule change to spread very quickly and widely. And as it spread, it was initially called the Madwoman's chess game because the chess queen became so powerful from the weakest to the strongest. And I guess this was thought to at first be slightly negative because it made the game shorter, right? So the games were shorter, so maybe a little bit less romantic, as before a chess game was seen as a way to like connect with often a lover. And in fact, in Marilyn Yalom's book, she talks about the link between eroticism and chess. And yet, of course, the game became very popular, and it's actually the chess that we know now that is currently experiencing a huge boom. None of the rules have really changed in 500 years since that experimentation with the queen. And of course, it's a way that many people try to bring girls into chess. They say the queen is the most powerful piece on the board, so why aren't you in this game? Well, I can't say that I agree with that logic very, very much. I do. And I think that it's one of the most powerful metaphors I've ever heard, that the queen became the most powerful game and it made the game better. But at first it was called the crazy woman. And so Marilyn Yalom in this book, she talks all about that. And it sounds like a subject that might not be enough for an entire book, but it is, because she also just talks about chess queens in general in medieval Europe. So there's a lot of interest there. And that, of course, was the inspiration for my book club title, The Madwoman's Chess Game. But I also wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about my own history with chess books, because I talked to you about how far back some of these chess books dated from the printing press and the 1500s. There were many popular chess books, but chess books also had a real formative experience for my career, and I know many other players' careers as well. That might be changing a little bit now as we shift to online books and e-readers and YouTube videos and other training modules, but books still have such a powerful place in chess, and I think that's because they really marry well together. The combination of chess pictures, or we call them diagrams, meaning this graphical representation of what a chess position looks like, and combining that with words, it's really quite perfect. And pictures sometimes too, although a lot of old chess books didn't really have pictures in them. I think more newer ones do. The combination to me is delightful. And of course, in a magazine like Chess Life magazine, you have all those three elements: pictures, words, and chess diagrams. And chess books, even more so than regular books, take a really, really long time to read. So there are often jokes about how it's so much easier to buy books than to actually read them. And I would say that that's probably like quadruply true for chess books. Because if you think about it, you can read a page. I don't know how long it takes you guys to read one page, but probably not that long. But if you're reading a chess page and there are diagrams in it, you actually have to think about each chess position before you turn the page. So it's probably like, you can decide how long you want to think, but it's probably like a few minutes a page minimum, maybe sometimes even 10, 30 minutes a page. So when I was a little girl, my dad, who's a chess master, along with my brother, they encouraged me to read books about checkmates and tactics. Because in chess, visualization is so important. And one of the best ways to improve your visualization is by repetition. So I remember this book by Fred Reinfeldt, 1001 Brilliant Ways to Checkmate. That was a book that I read at least 3 times, just over and over again. And there was a similar one about combinations and tactics by the same author. So I got addicted to these types of books. There was another one I remember when I played my first international tournament in Brazil called 100 Brilliant Endgames by Chernev. That really drew me in considerably as well. Another one that I loved as a kid was this one, Think Like a Grandmaster. This was not as much a book about, great chess checkmates. It was more a way to how to think, how to organize your thinking. And it's gotten a lot of criticism since of being like overly structured in its recommendation for how you should think as a chess player. But I remember at the time that I first read it, I felt like when I played chess, my thinking was so disorganized. I would just like look at all sorts of moves and then go back from move A to move C, back to move A, and forget if I'd already looked at B yet. It was really disorganized. And this book kind of unlocked this idea that you can organize your thinking like a grandmaster, even if you're not a grandmaster yet. And that could kind of propel you to the next level. Another one that had a huge influence on me, although I have to say when I read this book, I was already a very strong player. It's called Secrets of Chess Tactics by Mark Doveretsky. Mark Doveretsky was known, he died a few years ago, and he was known as just the greatest chess trainer and chess writer. And he wrote several books. This one is called more than several, probably 10 to 12 by now. Secrets of Chess Tactics by Mark Doveretsky was my favorite, though. It was so incredibly difficult. I mentioned earlier that sometimes when you read a chess book, it takes you like 3 to 10 minutes to read a page. Literally with his book, I remember sometimes spending an hour on a page or two because the positions were so complex. And that was by design. So these books by Doveretsky were for very advanced players. I have a very special memory of Secrets of Chess Tactics because it had this pink cover. I don't know if it was the edition that I got, but this looks more like peach, right? To me, it looks like a peachish color, less than pink. But maybe it's just the resolution on the screen or something. But I'll show you another picture that has my copy and then what that turned into. So this is a picture of me with my copy of Secrets of Chess Tactics back when I lived in Brooklyn. And here I am on the roof of my loft in Brooklyn. I later used this exact picture for the cover of my first book, which you can see here. And I think it always struck me that at that time, there were even fewer women who played chess seriously. It struck me that it was like this pink feminine cover for this like super technical, high level chess book. Like I liked that. I thought that was cool. And that I ended up having this like celebration of pink. And it turned out to be on the cover of my book several years later. I did not actually do that shoot for the cover of Chess Bitch. It just kind of happened later. And here it was, Chess Bitch, Women in the Ultimate Intellectual Sport, with me carrying this book that's now been kind of like anonymized, but it is, of course, The Secrets of Chess Tactics. Later, I wrote another book. And this one really ties into some of my favorite books as a girl. I told you that I really like chess tactics books, and I read so many different ones. There was another one by another Russian player, Block. There were some books by Lev Albert, who was a Russian grandmaster who moved to the United States. There was books by Laszlo Polgar. There were so many tactics books. I really liked them all. But one thing that I found missing were chess tactics by female players, by great women champions. Now, granted, at the time that I was playing very seriously, there were not as many super strong female players. So it was harder to find those tactics. Not only were there not as many strong female players, but there weren't as many games that were published. So there were often tournaments where the games weren't even archived. Nowadays, almost every major tournament, the games are archived. So I wrote Play Like a Girl to kind of collect those great games by female players so that there could be a book where a kid growing up looks at all these like checkmates and amazing, dazzling ideas. And even if she doesn't look at the solutions and, match up the names or really even bother to look at the names, she just kind of knows that they're all by women. And to me, I think that would have been powerful when I was a kid. And of course, I've also heard of many, many boys and men enjoying this book as well. So it's not like you can tell by looking at the positions that they're from great female players. They're just chess positions. But the fact that can be powerful at the same time. Since then, as I've indicated, there are far more great women players and far more books by them too. When I was a kid, I was completely enamored by the games and chess combinations of the Polgar sisters, who were the strongest chess players, the strongest female chess players in history, and really precocious chess prodigies. And particularly, the youngest of the Polgar sisters, Judith Polgar, was the strongest female player in history by a large margin. Oh, thank you, Sarah. So she is still an amazing force in the chess world. She's now an ambassador for chess and education, but she's also written multiple books. And one fantastic book is Judith Polgar, How I Beat Bobby Fischer's Record, where she goes through her games and particularly her road to beating Bobby Fischer's record for the youngest Grandmaster of all time, which is a really incredible record to beat. I find that to be an astonishing piece of chess history, that Judith Polgar, a teenager who grew up in Hungary and ended up beating the American world champion's record for the youngest Grandmaster of all time. And in those days, people didn't think it was possible that a woman could even become one of the strongest Grandmasters in the world, let alone beat Bobby Fischer's record. Bobby Fischer himself had many negative things to say about women and their potential for being great chess players. So Judith, of course, proved them all wrong, along with her sisters, Susan and Sophia, who were also extremely strong chess players, not as strong as Judith, but Susan became one of the first grandmasters in the world who was a female, and the first woman ever to earn the title in the traditional sense of playing in mixed competitions and closed tournaments. Since then, there have been dozens of women who are followed in their footsteps and become grandmasters, although nobody has reached the level of Judith. And I just think that if I had this book reading growing up, I would have read it 100 times. So to talk about the resurgence of chess, which I've already indicated a few times, I should mention that, I actually read this book, The Queen's Gambit, when I was a little kid. It came out shortly after I was born, and I read it, and somehow I remembered some things about it. I remember her in the orphanage seeing chess pieces in the ceiling, but I read it at such a young age. I have to admit, I did not grasp its genius. I didn't understand why it was such a great book. And so I reread it recently, of course, after the Netflix series came out. And I was really struck by how gripping it was, and also how emotive it was, and how much chess accuracy they really nailed, which was furthered in the series, where they actually took that to an unheard of level with the help of Garry Kasparov and Bruce Pandolfini, who consulted on the series. But there were a lot of differences between the book and the series. So if you love the Netflix series, I encourage you to check out the book. I'm going to read you one passage from the book now, one that really struck me. This was from, if you saw the Netflix series, this was from the part where Beth Harmon goes into the high school to play, I think it was 20 boys at once, and she beat them all. And this was a remarkable scene in the series, because we're really, at that point, starting to understand the depth of her chess talent and how extreme it is. And not only are we seeing it, but the world is starting to see it. So before that, it's, her and the janitor, Mr. Scheibel, in the basement, who see Beth Harmon's genius. And now it's opening up a little bit more to the world. And Walter Tevis, who wrote the book, The Queen's Gambit, this was based on the Netflix series, wrote of this when she was beating all these boys. Her mind was luminous and her soul sang to her in the sweet moves of chess. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and her shoes squeaked as she moved down the rows of players. The room was silent. She felt her own presence centered in it, small and solid and in command. Outside, birds sang, but she did not hear them. Inside, some of the students stared at her. Boys came in from the hallway and lined up against the back wall to watch the homely girl, from the orphanage at the edge of town who moved from player to player with the determined energy of a Caesar in the field, a Pavlova under the lights. There was about a dozen people watching. Some smirked and yawned, but others could feel the energy in the room, the presence of something that had never, in the long history of this tired old schoolroom, been there before. What she did was at bottom shockingly trivial, but the energy of her amazing mind crackled in the room for those who knew how to listen. Her chess moves blazed with it. By the end of an hour and a half, she had beaten them all without a single false or wasted move. She stopped and looked around her. Captured piece sat in clusters beside each board. A few students were staring at her, but most avoided her eyes. There was scattered applause. She felt her cheeks flush. Something in her reached out desperately towards the boards, the dead positions on them. There was nothing there now. She was just a little girl again, without power. You know, one of the striking things that you might have noticed was this word homely to describe Beth Harmon. I think it's an old-fashioned word. People don't use it so much anymore, meaning plain or not beautiful. And I couldn't be more different than the series, right? Where Anya Taylor-Joy plays Beth Harmon and is shockingly beautiful, right? So what happened there? Well, of course, you know, it's a TV series and they wanted to cast a beautiful actress. Well, that's not a big surprise. But I also think that if you continue to read in the book, Walter Tevis makes this point that when Beth Harmon plays chess, she becomes beautiful. So she's not beautiful when she doesn't play chess. And when she plays chess, she is beautiful. And there are some other passages in the book where he actually makes that point quite explicitly, that the chess game causes her to glow with beauty, which is certainly in some ways a male fantasy, I guess, of a female chess player. It's very much oriented in the male gaze, but it's also a beautiful way to think about the thinking woman, of this being the height of beauty for a woman, to be thinking as hard as possible. And there was actually some criticism. There was a piece in the New Yorker magazine about how the series would be even better if the lead actress wasn't so beautiful, which, considering what an amazing job Anya Taylor-Joy did winning the Golden Globe and everything, I think that's like a hard argument to make, honestly, because she embodied this role so beautifully. You can't necessarily just imagine somebody else doing it. But they thought their argument was, and there were a couple articles about this I read actually, their argument was that in the book, it was actually an important part of the story that she wasn't beautiful, because it was almost like she needed chess to feel glamorous and desirable. Whereas in the series, with that removed, it was a different dynamic. I don't actually agree with the criticism, but it's one really interesting thing that you grasp from reading the book as well as watching the series. And that was actually our very first book for the Madwoman's Book Club, which Shauna kindly mentioned at the beginning of this. You know, the reason I started the Madwoman's Book Club for US Chess was because after the Queen's Gambit, I was getting a lot of inquiries from women, not girls, women, who saw the Queen's Gambit, who wanted to get more involved in the chess world. And I was thinking about a way where we could get a lot of different people involved. And this seemed like a good idea, because if you do chess lessons or like a chess tournament, you have to kind of constrain yourself so that everybody is at a similar level, right? Whereas with a book club, complete beginner in chess and a chess champion can kind of connect over the same material. And we started out by reading The Queen's Gambit, of course, and that was fantastic. Anybody who's watching this, you can feel free to sign up yourself. And I'm going to show you some of the other books that we talked about. The second book we actually talked about was this book by a friend of mine who was actually a former Poker Stars ambassador along with me, and her name is Maria Konnikova, and she's written many great books. Most recently, she wrote about her poker career in a book called The Biggest Bluff. But this is a book that we decided to talk about for the book club, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes Mastermind. And this was about how, thinking like Sherlock Holmes in your everyday life can make you more successful and ways in which you can do it. And it was also a little bit about Maria Konikova's childhood and how she was exposed to Sherlock Holmes and this idea of really not just seeing, but also observing and paying attention, which interestingly enough is also a major, major theme in her book, The Biggest Bluff, about poker, that the secret to great poker play, or one of the secrets, is just the obvious sounding advice to pay more attention, which is increasingly difficult in a world where at the poker table and at work, you can have constant access to your friends via WhatsApp, your workplace via Slack and email. And actually, it's just very difficult to pay attention. So that by doing that, by getting into that deep flow or focus, you can actually, achieve a lot and be one of the best poker players at the table just by doing that. And it seems so easy, but in fact, it's really not. And so there was that overlap in both of her books, which reminds me of chess. But there's also another chess link with Sherlock Holmes. And this is one of my favorite books as a kid as well, The Chess Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes. This was a book about chess positions and retrograde analysis. What that means is this book has chess mysteries where you see a chess position on the board and you have to figure out how that position came about. So you would think that being a good chess player would make you really good at this, but actually not really. I have to tell you, I have trouble with the easiest examples in this book because chess players are trained to think forwards, and this is all about looking backwards, right? So we don't need to do that in chess. Just in the same way, how they say that even somebody who's in shape, if they are not used to climbing, they might climb stairs or something and actually be out of breath. I'm sure some of you might have that experience that you might be in good shape, but and run and do weightlifting. But if you're not used to climbing up steps and you climb up even 5 steps, 5 flights, sometimes that can be really whoa, what's happening to my breath? And I find that this to be kind of the mental corollary for that. It's yeah, you're good at chess thinking ahead, but suddenly you're forced to think backwards about what happened and you can't do it. And so I love this book, and it's also an example of how just because you're not good at something doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. In fact, often it's the opposite. If you're not good at something, your learning curve is the steepest. So it's a good thing to put your energy into as long as you're enjoying it. And this book, The Queen of Katwe, was our most recent selection for the Madwoman's Book Club. Highly recommended. It's about Fiona Mutesi, the Ugandan chess champion, and it's by Tim Crothers. It was written about 10 years ago. This was the original cover, but it was then the rights were bought by Disney, and it became an acclaimed Disney movie, The Queen of Katwe. So, of course, they did a reprint of the book, and I believe this is actually a movie poster as well as a reprint of the book itself. Fiona is quite a remarkable woman. She's now 25 and she's about to graduate from Northwest University. So after the book and the movie came out, she got a scholarship to Northwest University and she studied business management and finance. She was kind enough to come to my girls club. In the introduction, John mentioned that I am the program director of U.S. Chess Women. So I do a lot of work to get more girls and women into the game. And I will show you a little clip from a presentation she gave to us about why she's such a strong fighter over the board and why you should never give up. And that'll allow me to catch my breath. And I hope you enjoy it.
I'm kind of an aggressive player, but I feel that
Oops.
also reflected into my life. If I start the game, I just want to tap. I just want to go up to the end. I'll be fighting, but I think it also sometimes it's part of the way you raise or your life is. But I think yeah, personally, I've been realizing it because when I go back to all my games, I just like I'm so aggressive. I just go until up to the end. Like I have just a fighting spirit, even if like I'm losing or anything, I'll just go beyond it. But like it just shows like a lot of hope. Like sometimes like never give up. Like this game is so vicious. Don't give up. Come and fight to the end. You never know. It just can open up for you. You don't know what your opponent always what is thinking. So we never like resigning should not be part of the game. Just go to the end. At least be mated. Like what are you losing if like you're gonna be mated? It's the same sometimes, but you're gonna give yourself a chance to try.
You talk about how from chess to your life, you were also always fighting. What do you think the best life example of that was?
I think in my life, it just reflects the time whereby it's not shown on in the movie or anywhere, but it reflects the time where I was homeless with my family and we are living at the streets. But during that time, even the time whereby we did not have food, we did not have a roof over us, but we never gave up. Like my mom and us, all of us, we never gave up. Like all the coins we collected, we made sure like she like instead of getting something to eat, we collected all of the money so that we find something to do so that she gets like income instead. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I don't really see resigning in my life. I know just fighting towards the end until like when it's over and over.
Yeah, so of course the girls were very inspired by Fiona, and I do recommend the Disney movie as well as the book. Another book that we talked about, in the Madwoman's book club, we also talk about books that aren't necessarily related to chess, just because we find that there are so many books that have themes that are quite similar to chess. Like I mentioned, Mastermind, even if they're not directly related to it. Like John Urschel, who, by the way, is also a strong chess amateur, like a pretty serious chess player. But he is, of course, more known for his dual passion in football and math. And this book, I think, is really important because it shows how technical things like math, chess, STEM fields, a lot of people, if they don't pick it up right away and they aren't immediately super good or they aren't considered to be one of the best in their class, they can sometimes give it up. And sometimes that happens for life. I even see grown-ups say that they're just not good at math or they don't have the brain for chess. This is such a typical thing to hear. And I do it with other things, obviously not related to chess, but other things that I'm not good at, like, dancing or something. And I think that kind of fatalistic attitude is really problematic because usually there are ways to find your passion for things later in life. And it's particularly something as important as math and a field where we don't have enough women, where we don't have enough people of color, similar to the situation in chess. I think it's so key to, inspire people with the fun and passionate parts of the game, and to underscore that just because you don't get it right away doesn't mean that you're not gifted or can't have a career in it. I often talk about how when I started in chess, I wasn't talented. I was pretty slow. There's a lot of different ways to attack games. And all of my success in chess came in classical chess tournaments. So you can kind of see that just because you're a little slower than other people doesn't mean that you're not going to get to the end more fantastically. So yeah, this book I think was very powerful. If you have a high school student that who isn't that into math, I highly recommend you buy this book for them. I mean, obviously it's good for grown-ups too, but I think high school is a really important time because you might be deciding which classes to take and also like which classes to take later in college. And it's absolutely not too late at that age to, find your passion for more technical things. Oh, this is our next book for the Madwoman's book club, which is by Catherine Neville, and it's called The Eight. It is a great book. I'm super excited. It's fiction, and it was a bestseller. So I think probably since the Queen's Gambit, it's doing even better. And we have Catherine DeVille, who's also going to be talking to us in the book club. So we're very privileged that we often have the authors speak to us. John Urschel came, Maria Konnikova came. So like this Lunch with Books series, it's really nice to, connect with the authors themselves, especially when they're, great people. Concord Born 14 says that he loved that book. Yeah. So talented. Why was that not made into a movie yet? This is a brand new book, by the way, and it's our not the next, but the upcoming book for the Madwoman's book club, and it's called A Disordered Cosmos: A Journey into Dark Matter, Space, Time, and Dreams Deferred, and it's by a friend of mine who is a professor, Chanda Prescott-Weinstein. She's so incredibly talented. You should definitely check out this book, and this one is about science and astrophysics, because she's an astrophysicist, but it's also about the way that cutting off people from a field, either by sexism or racism or a combination of both, can actually have not just detrimental effects for the people who don't get to access the field, but for the field itself and the potential for those who aren't well represented to see things that other people can't see. Oh, it's such a great book. So definitely check that out. And you can also come to our book club, which is the Madwoman's Book Club. Here's a beautiful little graphic which tells you more about it. I wanted to open it up for questions now, because I have gone through so much material and I'm kind of excited to see what you guys want to know more about, since there have been so many topics covered, from the history of the game to inspiring young women in chess, to some of my favorite books, to some of the books that I find to be a great intersection between feminism and chess. And yeah, let's see what you guys have to say. I've seen some of your comments. Erin Denise Ravenbuller asks, how, with so many centuries of misogyny, the Queen became the most powerful chess piece? I know, it's insane, right? It's like such a crazy little piece of chess history. I'm not sure if you were there in the beginning, but I did talk about that at the very beginning of the presentation. Let me go to that slide. How do I start from the beginning? I feel like I'm going through the whole presentation now, but that's okay. So the birth of the chess queen, I guess Marilyn Yalom talks about how the reign of powerful queens like Isabella might have been related to the fact that the queen became the weakest to most powerful piece circa 1500. And also, they wanted to make the game better. And so they had to make some chess piece a lot stronger in order to make it a faster game. So the queen probably seemed like the most logical piece to do it with, because you can't make the king a lot stronger, right? Because then the game is all messed up. So you make the king stronger, then it's hard to checkmate. The knights and the rooks were already really strong. You can't make the pawns stronger, really, because it's just not going to work well. The pawns are more like the bones of the game that form the structure that all the other pieces work within. And if you make the bishop stronger, then you have to make both bishops stronger, right? Because there's two of them. So I think it was also a matter of necessity. Like, if you wanted to make the game of chess faster, like, the queen really is the only choice, I think. Maybe I'm just thinking like hindsight bias here, but thinking about it like back of the envelope, it does seem like it would be difficult to use another piece to have a similar effect. I think it would be a little tough. You could do something like make the rooks more powerful, but not quite as powerful as the queen. Like, there's a piece in Chinese chess, I believe, called the cannon. It seems so ironic, though, that the queen is so powerful when the king is hiding most of the time. I know, right? I wrote a piece for the Washington Post after the Queen's Gambit came out, where I talked about how I feel like everybody says the queen is the most powerful piece, but the king is the most important piece, because when the king is mated, the game is over, right? But, I had a different interpretation of that. I mean, of course, I understand that the king being the most important piece is a very, very logical interpretation. But I also think that there's an argument for the pawn being the most powerful piece in the game, just because the pawn is the piece where all the other pieces work within it, right? Like, and it has this like weird property that it moves forward, but it captures diagonally. And if you kind of contemplate on that and think about like how other ways a pawn could move, you'll see that it's actually quite special. And that if you did not have that rule and that feature of the pawn, the game would be kind of messy or not messy enough. So the precision of the pawn movement is extremely important to the game being what it is. Sean, do you want to, I know you have some questions for me too.
Yeah.
I'm going to open up.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm also opening up my, YouTube so I can see what people are asking as well. How old? Do you want me to take your questions first, or should I look at some of these from YouTube, Sean?
Go right ahead. I'll save mine for later.
Oh, there's some good ones. Oh, you're planning on reviving the library's chess club. That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that, John. Susan asks, how old was the oldest person you've played chess with in a competition? You know, I actually don't know, Susan. I know I've played some, you know, definitely some older people, probably 80s, 90s, maybe. I know that there was one man in his 80s that I used to play quite frequently, and he was great. But, you know, in chess, you don't really think about the oldest. Really, you know, the person you're playing is more just, you look at the rating. And I think that that's one nice thing about chess, that in some ways it takes away these boundaries of age and gender, and you're just connecting on the same board. Of course, there are like senior and junior competitions. So then, of course, you're like hyper aware of how old everybody is. But in a regular open tournament, you play someone, you're not necessarily thinking about that. But I do think chess is amazing for seniors. And actually, a lot of my programs over the pandemic, both in the Madwoman's book club and also the women's chess classes that we're running at US Chess, which, you know, you guys should check out or spread the word about. The info is all on uschesswomen.org. I've noticed that a lot of seniors are interested in partaking in it, especially maybe a couple months ago, before the vaccine rollout. And that made me tremendously happy, because I think that there's so much focus on education over the pandemic, which is really important, but also the isolation of senior populations with being at higher risk maybe wasn't given as much attention as it could have been. And so it really made me happy to see some seniors kind of get back into the game, or even get into it for the very first time. It's a great game for any age, because if you learn when you're older, it might be harder to get really good. But I think in some ways it's easier to appreciate the beautiful aspects of chess if you learn later in life.
Here's a question from Carol on the screen.
I see it. Oh, where and when did the game originate? Carol said. Well, the game originated in India, and yet the game as we know it with the current rules was born around 500 years ago. And that's why I started this presentation with the birth of the chess queen. So there were like precedents of chess, Chaturanga, which was like chess where a lot of the pieces were the same, but there was no queen. It's still a cool game, though. I've played it on chess.com recently, actually. They did a chess.com and DeepMind did like a couple of promotional events, and DeepMind had worked with former world champion Vladimir Kramnik on creating all these like chess variants and then testing them with their super AI, AlphaZero. So these variants that were tried were also like now games that you can play on chess.com, which is pretty fun. And Chaturanga is one game. I actually played it a couple of times. It's interesting. I think playing games like that, like playing ancient chess, it's hard to find an opponent. I don't even know who I was playing. It took me like 10 minutes to get an opponent, but I finally got an opponent. But it kind of gives you an appreciation for the fact that everything in chess is relative. So a rook is only as powerful as the other pieces around it. So when in our current game, a rook is like, it's pretty powerful. It's the second most powerful piece on the board. But when you're playing like Chaturanga, like the knights and the rooks are just like massive. They just tower over the position because there's no queen. So like that's what you got. So I find that interesting that just by like playing different variants of what you already play, you can kind of see things that might be harder to see otherwise.
Here's a question from Phyllis.
Oh, Phyllis, great question. Has the Queen's Gambit affected your role in the chess world? And if so, how? It's been fantastic for me, Phyllis. It's been awesome. I mean, ever since I wrote Chess Bitch 15 years ago, I've been trying to like tell people that chess is for women and girls and that chess is glamorous and fun and beautiful and not just about like crushing people, but also about like the art of the game and the beauty of it and losing yourself in beautiful moves. And well, the Queen's Gambit proved to people all of those things were true. And I think that it was like a godsend for the chess community because people can kind of understand us more, understand why chess is so great. The fact that it coincided with a concurrent boom because of the rise of chess online was really, really good synergy as well. But yeah, it's been fantastic for me. I just feel like all the things I've been studying and working on basically my whole life, other people are more genuinely interested in. And I say genuinely because I feel like people always find it kind of like quirky and interesting, my work. But the thing is, they see it more as like a subculture, right? Like as like some kind of like weird stuff I'm working on. Whereas now it's like, no, like they're genuinely interested in it and potentially getting involved, or if not themselves, getting their like friend or daughter involved. So yeah, it's just been like the best.
Let's see. How about this one?
What thoughts do I have about the WGM title? Does it help encourage more women to excel, or should it be set aside, says Concord Born? I've written about this before, the WGM title. I'm not, I don't usually use it. Like, you notice Sean didn't put it in the introduction, I don't believe, because it's not whenever I write an introduction or a biography of myself, I never include it. The women's Grandmaster title. I always talk about my, being the first female to win the Junior Open or winning, 2 US women's championships, or like my books or all the other stuff I've done, Poker Stars Ambassador and like all the work I've done with US Chess Women and my podcast. It just doesn't make it to my top like 20 things because it's so controversial. And like I've done so many things that I'm proud of. I don't really want to list something in my CV up there where people are like immediately going to like challenge it and be like, well, is that a really like legitimate title? Like, that's not something I really want to do. But that said, I think that there is an over obsession with this question because most chess players, they care mostly about rating. So how high are you rated is the truest reflection of your strength. So the WGM title requires you to get a pretty high rating in chess. You have to be around 2,400 rated to be a WGM. So that's a very strong player. So it's like, to me, it's like, to ask a very strong player, like, is your title legitimate? Like, it's weird. So I just wish people would just kind of relax about it and like, just, women who don't really want to use it, don't use it. And maybe eventually it could be like merged with the International Master title, like that would be a really great fusion. And then if you decide you want to use it, great. If you decide you prefer to use the IM title, that's also great. And meanwhile, more and more women have achieved the overall Grandmaster title. There's 37 now. I think there'll probably be even more, but we've had like an entire year pause on competitive chess over the board, which you need to get those norms because of COVID. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. Like, I'm not a big fan of using it for my own work because it confuses people, but I think that it also denotes a high playing skill. So women who are proud of having it should continue to be proud of it.
Okay. This next question was similar to one that I had, but I'll preface it by saying, in your book, you mentioned the fact that early on you didn't like gambling. yet you're a poker star. Here's the question.
Oh, from Erin, what chess skills do I find work well for poker and vice versa? I think the approach to chess study is like really useful for poker players. And actually, the games are kind of converging because more poker players are getting interested in chess and more chess players. Well, chess players have always been kind of interested in poker. But I think that the way chess players study is really starting to catch on in poker over the last few years. Even like the last decade, but just continuing to accelerate. Because the way chess players study, like I talked about, think like a grandmaster, the organized way that they study, the years of pedagogical research on what's the best way to teach children chess, the years of research. I mean, there are so many research studies that use chess, right? Chess has always been taken seriously by the academic and pedagogical community in a way that poker isn't. And I think the problem with that was that for a while, poker players would study in a very haphazard way, partly because of that, because they didn't have that guidebook. Because we teach children chess and children's education is so important, there's just kind of an inherent desire to do it the right way in chess. And I'm not saying we do it perfectly or that everybody does it perfectly or that there's not room to grow. Obviously there is. But I feel like chess players have always taken that so seriously, whereas poker only in recent years has it caught on that you have to be organized, that you have to use computer programs, all of these things. And that's why I say chess is becoming more like poker because it's becoming more glamorous, and poker is becoming more like chess because it's more studious and scientific than it's ever been. But to answer your question about skills, what skills you can bring from one to the other. In chess, the fact that you have to pay attention and focus can translate to poker. The approach to study, as I already outlined in depth. And also the fact that, like Sean mentioned, chess players aren't usually gamblers. I mean, there are definitely some who are, but the fact that when I got into poker from the very beginning, I was never thinking about I hope I hit that ace. Of course I did hope I hit that ace, but it wasn't like a cognitive thing. That's how I'm going to win this game by hitting that ace. It's just an emotional response that I wanted to win the hand. I'm human. But in general, I was always thinking about how can I make the best play? How can I, get better and not make so many mistakes? Very, very similar to how I approach chess. Things that poker players can teach chess players, I think practical thinking. When I played chess professionally, one of my biggest weaknesses was practicality. And you might be able to glimpse that from my career because I'm very artistic. I love the creative aspects of the game. I created art exhibitions about chess. You can look up hula chess. I love that side of the game. I love the beautiful moves, the combinations, and the Sherlock Holmes and the great chess compositions. But while all of that is great, when you're sitting at the board and playing against another human, if you want to increase your chances of winning, sometimes you need to throw that out the window and try to make the best practical decisions to do that. And I wasn't always that good at it, but poker helped me with that a little bit. I give you one example. In chess, the games are timed. So you have to pick how much time you're going to think for each decision. A practical chess player is really good at allotting that time so that they're more likely to win the game. So they try to find moments where using time will make them make better moves. Whereas somebody who's more fanciful will sometimes just think for a long time in a position because it's a cool position. I mean, that's just the way that chess players who love the game sometimes think about it. So poker players' ruthless pragmatism can really pay off if you're trying to win chess games.
Okay. And before we get to the drawing, Sarah had asked what's a good book for beginners?
Oh, beginner books. I have a lot of friends who've written chess books for beginners. Sabrina Chavans wrote a book called Chess for Children. There's also a book by Jessica Martin about the beginning chess moves. There's some books by Yasser Seirawan, who I often work with. chess commentary gigs at the St. Louis Chess Club. He's written a series of books for beginners. I also recommend the training sites because, there's these 3 great chess sites, Play Magnus, there's the Play Magnus group, there's chess.com, and there's Lichess. And a lot of them have like really great free training modules. Lichess is totally free. It's like an open source website. So everything is free there. So you can go, you can make donations if you want to, but it has like some really good like tutorials on how to move the pieces and stuff. And chess.com does as well. And my son really likes, who's 4, he really got into chess because of this app called Magnus's Kingdom, which is this like adventure world where you meet Magnus Carlsen and you have to beat him in a game, and you kind of like collect chess pieces and rescue them. It's kind of really fun. Yeah.
Game within a game. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask my one question.
Sure.
Which is, I have to choose which one I'm going to ask. So talk about, you in your book, you mentioned playing like a girl and how it was different in chess than people might expect. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Especially when I wrote those books, Play Like a Girl. Judith Polgar, the greatest female player in history and one of the greatest attacking players in history, period, male or female, was such a beast when it came to tactics and aggression that for women players, I think it really rubbed off on them. So a lot of female players, especially like 5 to 10 years ago, because they were like always watching Judith Polgar's games or studying her previous games, they would try to like play similarly to her. I think a lot of them. So actually many great female players are extremely aggressive. I think there's other reasons for it too. Like Judith is one philosophy or theory. Another one is that women players always get more attention. And sometimes they're also, when they're little, they're maligned for, not being aggressive enough or not belonging in, these spaces like chess. So to overcompensate, they might develop very, very aggressive styles. I think for me, it was a combination of the two. Judith Polgar, and then also feeling like I wanted to be super aggressive to like defy any stereotypes. So that's why it actually came at some point that people would say like, oh, girls and women, they like play too aggressive. They attack so much. It's hysterical, which I thought to be like really hilarious, but also sad that, it was something that people would always kind of ascribe to a masculine trait. But then when it became a feminine trait, it immediately became like a negative, like crazy, yeah. Instead of just strong and aggressive.
Similar to what happened to the Queen when she
Exactly.
Okay, so we've had several questions, and thank you, Jennifer, for answering them all wonderfully. And now I'm going to draw a name to win the book, which is right here in my hand. Phyllis Sigel has won. Phyllis,
yay!
You're the winner of Jennifer's book, which I will get to you very soon. And again, thank you, Jennifer. Excellent job. And we appreciate lots of good comments coming in. And
beautiful. Love to see it. And I'm happy Phyllis won. I think she asked a really good question earlier, so I'm happy to see it. And yeah, any women, or if you know any women who want to be part of our programs, or girls, check it out. And boys and men too. I always talk about how our programs, even though the clubs themselves are for our women's spaces, we often have like videos that show the highlights. And I think it's important for men and boys to learn from great women as well.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much. Excellent program. Next week, Peniel Joseph. The book is Sword and the Shield, about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. We'll see you next time, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.